You just had a 3-hour conversation. You said everything right, calm, clear, respectful, no yelling, no blaming, just healthy communication. And somehow you feel worse than before, just with better vocabulary. Not closer, not understood, just tired and weirdly alone. So you replay it in your head like a black box recording from a plane crash, except you're both the crash. I explained it perfectly. I didn't even raise my voice. I used the right words. So why did it feel like talking to a wall? Here's the part nobody tells you. Communication doesn't always fix the problem. Sometimes it just documents it. It creates a high-definition 4K record of exactly why you two don't work. And now, you have the subtitles to prove it. It usually starts with something small, a tone, a message that was left unread for 40 minutes too long, a look that feels slightly off. Not a big deal, just enough to sit wrong in your chest, like a swallowed piece of gum. So you decide to talk about it, like a functional adult. You sit on the couch, maybe light a candle, and prepare to be vulnerable. But watch what actually happens. You're not just talking. You're not talking anymore. You're quietly preparing closing arguments. You start collecting moments like evidence for a grand jury. This is the 3rd time this week. You always do this thing where you sigh when I'm talking. That's not what you said yesterday at 6:15 p.m. And in your head, there's this quiet, desperate belief. If I explain this clearly enough, if I find the perfect sequence of nouns and verbs, they'll finally get it. Meanwhile, they're doing the exact same thing. They aren't listening to your pain. They are proofreading your arguments for mistakes. Different examples, same energy. Now it's not a conversation anymore. It's a scoreboard. You say something vulnerable leads to +1 point. They defend themselves leads to +1 point. You clarify your point with a sharp, logical edge leads to +1 point. And the weird part is, you can feel yourself getting better at it. Better at explaining. Better at staying calm. Better at choosing the right words. You start sounding like someone who knows what they're doing, which would be great if it was actually working, but it isn't. Because now, instead of saying something messy like, "That hurt," you say, "I felt a slight disconnect in how that interaction was processed," which is accurate, technically impressive. So the conversation gets cleaner, more structured, more emotionally optimized, and at the same time, less real, less human. You're not reacting anymore. You're presenting. They're not listening anymore. They're analyzing. And somewhere in the middle of all that clarity, the original feeling, the simple, stupid, honest one, gets completely lost. Not because it wasn't valid, but because it got translated too well. Nobody is listening. Everyone is waiting for their turn to be right. It looks calm. It sounds logical. But underneath, it feels like two lawyers arguing over who hurt who first, while the house is quietly burning down around them. And the whole time, something subtle is happening. You're not trying to understand them anymore. You're trying to win in the nicest way possible. And that's the moment the connection quietly dies, signed and notarized by your healthy communication. To understand why talking it out makes us feel like we're drowning, we have to look at the security guard in your basement, the amygdala. The problem is, it can't tell the difference between a tiger and a slightly judgmental comment. When you hear, "we need to talk," your brain doesn't hear emotional growth. It hears, "this might go badly." It hits the panic button. Adrenaline floods your system. Your heart rate climbs. This is what psychologists call an amygdala hijack. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that understands nuance, empathy, and why you actually love this person, basically goes on a coffee break. It's offline. You are now a prehistoric primate trying to survive a conversation about who forgot to buy the oat milk. In this state, genuine communication is biologically impossible. You are just two security guards barking at each other through a fence because you're both convinced the person on the other side is a threat. You aren't sharing I statements, you're just throwing logical spears. But there's a deeper glitch in the system. Even when you aren't in fight mode, you're often trying to solve two entirely different problems using the same conversation. Person A is having an emotional problem. They feel invisible, unsafe, like they don't matter. They aren't looking for a solution, they're looking for a signal that they aren't alone. Person B thinks they're solving a logical problem. They see a mess and they want to fix it. They want to optimize the schedule, balance the budget, or explain why their logic was actually sound. So when person A says, "I'm lonely," and person B responds with, "But we spent 4 hours together on Sunday, and we have dinner plans on Friday." And that's exactly why it doesn't work. And they are both failing. One is looking for a hug, the other is looking for proof the feeling doesn't make sense. Person B is trying to fix the feeling by debunking it with facts. But you can't fix a hole in the soul with a logical explanation of why the hole shouldn't be there. The more you explain, the more the other person feels like their reality is being erased. The talking doesn't bridge the gap. It just highlights how wide the gap has become. The dark truth is that we often use communication as a form of control. If I can explain my pain well enough, I can force you to see me. If I can describe my hurt with enough precision, you will have no choice but to change. We've turned vulnerability into a weaponized performance. We use therapy speak, words like boundaries, validation, and processing, not to open up, but to shield ourselves. If I use the right words, I can stay safe while I tell you everything that's wrong with you. We've mistaken describing the problem for feeling the connection. But you can know every single biological fact about a flower and still never notice that it's dying. So we keep talking, we talk until the sun comes up, the coffee is cold, and our throats are dry. We do it because the alternative is terrifying. The alternative is admitting that some gaps can't be talked away, that some parts of us will always be misunderstood, that healthy communication isn't a magic wand. It's just a flashlight that sometimes shows you exactly where the bridge is broken. Maybe communication isn't about finding the right words to say. Maybe it's just about realizing when to stop talking and start being in the room together. No scoreboard, no lawyers, no prehistoric security guards. But that would mean sitting in silence. And silence is where the truths we can't fix live. It's much easier to keep talking than to sit there and realize nothing you're saying is fixing it, even if all you're doing is describing the ruins.